Welcome back, fellow time travelers. I'm your director of time travel, Mary Barbara Hanna. Over our last three episodes, we've dug into the history of Parkersburg from prehistoric times up through the adventures of George Washington along the Ohio River. As our focus is specifically Parkersburg, West Virginia, though, in this episode we'll meet Alexander Parker, the namesake of our city. Now, Alexander Parker was born in 1753 near Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And in 1775, at the age of 22, he joined the Continental Army's 6th Pennsylvania Regiment and served during the American Revolution. In June of 1778, he fought in the Battle of Monmouth under troops commanded by none other than George Washington, General George Washington. And we know that this is the same George Washington that had surveyed the Ohio River, been up and down the Ohio River. And it's probably no wonder then that after Parker served in the war, he bought land and or was awarded land in this area of the Ohio River. So undoubtedly in close connection with George Washington, and other men had heard about the lands in Western Virginia, the beauty of those lands. And then those lands were offered to these men who served in the war as rewards for their service. So they could, plot their land out there, survey, go see the land and buy what they wanted. So in this case, I've circled the Ohio River, but what I want you to notice is below that area. So you see Virginia's sort of in that pink circle, and within that is this blue circle, which is, as best as I can tell, where I think Parkersburg is. But notice how Virginia continues across the map, and right below it the same for North Carolina, and then even South Carolina. And because I zoomed in, you don't get to see it, but below South Carolina is Georgia, and their land extended all the way across because this was British colonies, and so this is where the British land was. And in and this actually is from 1773, I think. So this is land that's not quite the U.S. land yet. It's going to become the U.S., the United States of America. But in this moment, this is a little bit of an older map. But what fascinated me was just how the land extended eastward. I think I even told you in one episode that, of course, the British had land from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And it was just one big blob of land. It wasn't divided up into the colonies as the colonies were over there on the East Coast. Maps, I love them. So, at the end of the Revolutionary War, people were encouraged to move west into the newly minted United States, which makes sense. They had just gotten all this land. They didn't want the land to fall back into the hands of the British or the French, even though the French helped us. And so, the sooner we could get quote unquote Americans going west and settling that land, the sooner the government could feel confident that this land wouldn't go back, or skirmishes wouldn't occur, even though that does happen in 1812. But War of 1812 doesn't really impact us all the way down here in Parkersburg. So in this case, we don't have to worry about that. So 1783, we've got Alexander Parker. He pays $50 for about 1,400 acres of land along the north side of the Little Canal River where it meets the Ohio. And I'm going to show you a map of that in a minute. I have a lot of maps in this episode, and I love them, but you may not. So I'm trying to fill in with some other pictures. What I wanted to show you then in this picture is the type of boat, a flatboat that was used to navigate at that time the unpredictable Ohio River. Now, I think I told you, and we saw a minute ago how long the Ohio River is. It runs nearly 1,000 miles from Pittsburgh, which at that time, when people were first going up and down the Ohio, was called Fort Duquesne, because why? That's right. It was in French territory. So Fort Duquesne, it is where the confluence of the Monongahela and the Allegheny rivers come together to form the Ohio. And the Ohio goes 998 miles to, that's right, Cairo, Illinois. Very good on your spot quiz there. So in this case, what we want to talk about is the unpredictability of the Ohio River. Now, the Ohio River, before locks and dams were installed to manage the height, or the depth, I guess I should say, of the water. It could be anywhere from 3 feet deep to 20 feet deep. So this flatboat was designed to help them navigate on this river that was this unpredictable depth of water. And if it was a dry season, it could be very shallow. And so they had these oars that they would use to help push themselves along. You can see this. I'm sure there's can I think of what that thing is called in the back to help steer it? No, but other people know, and they'll fill it in for you. The rudder, thank you. There is nobody here. It was just my mind remembered. And so the rudder to help steer the boat, but also they put everything they had. You can see animals. You see people fishing off the back of the boat, little kids. If you look up on top, there's like a mother or a grandmother sitting on her stool with her dog by her side. They've got their canoes. Yeah, so and inside there's actually a woman standing in the doorway where the bull is, the one with the horns, over to the right of this boat and on the boat. And so inside would have been all their household goods, their food, clothing, pots and pans, whatever they thought they were going to need because they're going to a place where none of this exists. So if you didn't bring it with you, you weren't going to have it unless you could make it, right? I mean, these people, this is why pioneers are so fascinating. That dogged determination, right? All right. So that gives you the idea of these boats that start coming down the Ohio River. And someday maybe we'll do a whole series on Marietta because that is a whole nother fascinating place. I mean, we've talked a little bit about Marietta, but anyway, so the boats are coming down, and this is, we're getting prepared for the arrival of Alexander Parker. However, Alexander Parker does not come out to this area. In fact, it's his friend, Captain James Neal, came out in 1784 to survey the land. Now, I want you, as you look, again, I told you this episode happens to have a lot of maps in it. And of course, when he came here, all the streets weren't named. There was not really going on there. But he is surveying the land, and he was told or he surveyed the land where it was the straightest. So in the circle of blue, you can see the curvy shores going down the Little Kanawha River. Now, again, this map is a little bit older. I think this is from the 1800s, like 1878 or something. But what I want you to really focus on is that it's curvy there. So in that blue circle. So he doesn't count that as part of the survey. He goes in where the land is square enough that he can start to survey that land. So that's the land. And this is 84. Not a lot of like ways to record this stuff. And this isn't even a county. The county here closest to them would have been maybe a 4 hour maybe 4 hour like horseback ride. Like you had to go a whole day someplace else to go to the courthouse. I think it was Harrison County. Anyway, so this is, he's doing the best he can with what he's got, rudimentary tools. He maps out some stuff. And then, as I curse down here, this land was eventually claimed. So the land in the blue is actually claimed by a man named John Stokely. Not only does he take the land in the blue circle, but across the Little Kanawha as well. I didn't really mark it here, but this is also part of Stokelyville, and he builds a little land bridge to connect the two. So John Stokely puts in a quit claim deed in April of 1792, and he starts up a little area called Stokelyville, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. But what I want you to see is this land circled in blue. So Captain Neal goes back to Parker in Pennsylvania. And in fact, Neal is so thrilled with the beauty of the frontier land, he packs up his family, sails back down the Ohio River to the Little Kanawha, and then another half mile or so up the Little Kanawha to land he claimed. And I've got it over here. You can see it in purple over to the very right of your screen, the N for Neal, not for North, although that's actually kind of accurate. So this is a map from 1873, more 100 years later, almost, from when Neal actually would have been there. And he comes and builds a set of block houses in 1795. And he sets up his home with his family. He builds this block house and puts a stockade around it, and this is where they live. What's interesting is the topography hasn't really changed. The Little Kanawha still looks like that. I mean, going down in the Ohio River, all that stuff, still the same. So back to John Stokely now in 1796, recalling the kind of curvy line along the Little Kanawha River, he establishes the town of Springville, sometimes also called Stokelyville, and it included, as I said, both sides of the Little Kanawha, north and south, including those odd edges that ran along the land owned by Alexander Parker. Springville included, I mean, it was a town. I mean, cabins came along. There was a couple of inns. There was a tannery, and a forge. And now, this, of course, the picture I'm showing you is not accurate, but it's sort of accurate because you can see the houses in Stokelyville. They're at the lower part of the picture, and then what would eventually become Parkersburg growing up across the river. And that's a picture we'll dissect further in the future when you just see how amazing, how big Parkersburg grew to be. Really beautiful there. Anyway, so we've got Stokelyville in the lower half of the picture, and people, homes were coming up, as I said, a couple of inns, a tannery, a forge. So the area surveyed by Captain Neal for Alexander Parker was known as Newport. That's right. It was not Parkersburg initially. It was called Newport. So this drawing, as I said, it's from a much later time in Parkersburg history, but we just want to see what Stokelyville would have looked like. And now, in fact, if we go one step further, this is what, and you can't really see Stokelyville because it's not there anymore. You see the concrete, it's really a four-lane corridor, Route 50 coming across the river there. And this, it's not like I'm spoiling any surprises, but you see just how much Parkersburg changed, especially the waterfront. And we're going to get into all that later. But this is, yeah, Stokelyville is long gone, and it is just a hillside up to Fort Borman. Unfortunately, Alexander Parker never made it to Parkersburg to see his land, and he died in 1791 back in Pennsylvania. So, what happened? How did we become Parkersburg? Well, about 1802, his daughter, Mary Parker, she's his heir, and she comes to Parkersburg, she and her husband, and they look at the land. They want to see what her father left her, and they realize that Stokely is on much all that land that goes right up to the Little Kanawha River. So Captain Neal had not done he hadn't surveyed the land in such a way to include that riverbank. So Stokely just kind of took it over, and she realizes that that land also belongs to her father. So she and her husband, William Robinson, come into town. They survey the land themselves. They take people to court, and they win because they actually have the paperwork to show that her father owned that land. So she sues Stokely, claiming the land that he received was based on that survey done by Neal. It's in error. And this went on for a little bit of time, but it was about 1810 when everything was done, all the hearings. And again, the court is not necessarily happening right here, although maybe it would be. Now I'm kind of lying because 1803 is the establishment of Wood County, separate from the other counties. And we haven't even talked about Hugh Phelps. He's coming up, but Hugh Phelps actually helps establish Wood County, and that's this area. So I think they would have, and the courthouse, you know what? There was a courthouse here, 1803. So it is all happening right here in Wood County. So probably also an exciting time. People are probably going to the courthouse to hear and gathering in taverns and on street corners to hear all the gossip about whose land this really is. And other people are also living in Newport, right? And that's all. You look at this pink and this green, that has nothing to do with our discussion today. That's that, 1873 map. But the pink and the green, this area belongs to Parker, and there are people living in this area. So people can either buy their land outright from Mary Parker and her husband. They can move, which a lot of people do. They end up moving off the land, or a lot of people end up buying the land. And then Mary Parker and her husband donate the land where our current courthouse sits right now. Now, of course, that courthouse is more recent, but the land where the courthouse was in 1803 stays, and they let them have it. So William Robinson and Mary Parker negotiate an out-of-court settlement with Stokely, the other landowners, and in honor of her father, Mary has this area renamed Parkersburg. And what's interesting is you'll notice there's an H at the end, much like Pittsburgh. There was an H on the original name of Parkersburg. So we'll talk more about, and just very briefly, when is that H removed? Sometime later. So, with the land disputes at the end, the little frontier town was ready to blossom. And in our next episode, we'll continue our exploration of Parkersburg about the same time frame, the late 1700s, early 1800s. We're going to talk about a man named Harmon Blennerhassett. And if you're not familiar with him, you are in for a huge treat. This guy was quite a character, and hundreds of years later, we're still talking about him. I'm Mary Barbara Hanna, your Director of Time Travel. Thanks for stopping by, and see you next time.